Look, they cannot all be winners. And welcome back to Devlog. In this devlog I will be talking about the new character skin swapping system. This is a system to swap the visual view of the player into a different costume that the player can unlock as they progress through the game. I'll first explain how this mechanic works for the player. In the hub area there is a bunch of bubble objects that represent different skins that the player can pick between. The player will then interact with these and they will swap the player's skin. This is controlled in the player visual scripting, the same scripting that controls all visual effects for the players, and all this does is it changes the visual sprite, texture, material used, sprites for the potions that the player throws, and certain visual effects like the trails that follow the player when they are moving very quickly to be the colour of the skin that they are switching to. The way these are unlocked is either by beating X number of levels. This is for costumes that aren't tied to specific levels and are just unlocked whenever the player needs to beat a specific number of levels. So for example, beat 10 levels and you can unlock a certain skin, or a skin that is unlocked by beating a specific level. These would be the skins that are corresponding to an actual level. The coding for this is incredibly simple. It works the exact same way as the hub level coding, being that we either check if the player has beaten a number of levels, and then we check if the player has beaten a specific level from the list of levels that the player would need to be beating to unlock this skin. If the player has, we will enable this game object. If the player hasn't, we will disable this game object, and the player can just therefore not interact with it until they have beaten these levels. Now to talk about the specific skin designs. First being the skin you unlock for the Desert Desert. Once you have beaten the Desert Desert, you can use this skin. This has candy floss hair, a cookie skin, and then nice little pink clothing and candy cane accents on some of the clothing, as well as gumballs replacing the potions, so the player has a different visual for this. This skin was inspired by a few different things. Obviously, since the skin has to correspond to the Desert Desert, the player has to look like they are made of different candied items. So they have candy floss hair, they have a cookie, sort of chocolatey skin. However, that's very difficult to tell because it's pretty difficult to change the visual for the skin into a different form without it just looking like a different colour of the character's skin, but there is slight speckles on the skin to indicate that it has a chocolatey cookie sort of shading in opposed to Pep-Pel's normal skin texture. And then she has jelly beans for buttons on her clothing. Her actual costume has changed slightly to be a different sort of overall skirt. And then I used the same candy cane visual style for the rest of her clothing. Her backpack has changed into a velvet little sack, and the reason for this is that I wasn't sure what sort of a candy backpack I could draw, so I just drew something that would look different than the actual backpack. This was the first skin I drew for the character, so I mostly wanted to experiment with different designs, and I thought maybe a little velvet pouch would look interesting on the sprite changes. So I just drew a velvet pouch. The velvet pouch doesn't really match the rest of the skin. The skin was inspired in two parts, the first part being Cookie Run Kingdom characters, specifically one that had a darker cookie skin. That was the inspiration for the actual skin being a cookie-ish chocolatey colour. I have never played this game, but I have seen the characters drawn, and I think they have a cute little style. And the other character inspiration for the visual for this character is the trickster mode of the character Roxy from Homestuck, which I understand is a pretty obscure reference for a visual. But the actual design for this character is in the forefront of my mind and heavily inspired the way I specifically drew the fringe front portion of the character's candy floss hair, specifically being a bright pinkish colour indicative of candy floss and this curly, thick visual for it. The second skin I drew was the Trash Trail skin. I'm a big fan of this skin for multiple reasons, the first being that I very much like trees. The second reason being that I'm a big fan of how it turned out. My main goal with the level specific skins and a lot of the skins I was trying to add for this test and for this devlog was for them to be as different than the base drawing of Pep-Pel as possible. So the Desert has a much different hairstyle and clothing style. The Trash Trail has a completely different visual style from the character. She is made of wood. For obvious reasons, the Trash Trail is a woodland area. The skin for this level should also be a woodland based skin, but she also has a garbage bag for her backpack, a little garbage bag loincloth, and a little purpley snot dribble from her nose. This is for the trash elements of the Trash Trail, so she has the nature visual side of that level and then also the gross garbage side as well. Originally, I wasn't specifically sure of what to do with the character's face. I was originally going to have hollowed out holes in her eyes, similar to Coco from Animal Crossing, because I felt that would work well with the woodland style of her character, but then having a mostly naked woodland character with holes for eyes, I felt it would look a bit too similar to the woodsman from Hilda, so I wanted to avoid a very similar character visual, so instead I liked to give her no eyes and instead have her grassy hair covering her face completely, so you can't even tell that she has no eyes, but canonically the skin has no eyes. And then her potions are replaced with a orange and pink fruit. The potions, by the way, all have to match the orange and pink art style. That is my rule in character creation, but as so long as the actual things that the character is throwing are orange and pink, they don't specifically have to be a potion, they can be any item they want. Which is why there is a heavy inconsistency of what the potions actually are. They could be fruits, gumballs, potions, doesn't particularly matter so long as they are orange and pink. It's more specifically important that the colour scheme matches, in opposed to them being potions. Originally, the idea for this character design skin was going to be that Pep-Pel would be fully naked with just the woodland tree bark covering, but the issue with this is in the rigging of the Pep-Pel 3D animated sprite. It requires there to be a upper torso, middle section where the belt is kept, and a lower torso. So the issue with this is, even if I wanted to make the character have an upper torso into a lower torso, and then I could just not draw a sprite for the belt, and that would forego the needing for a belt design in this character design, there would still be animation issues where there could be a sprite section missing in certain bodily motions, so it made more sense for me to include a belt design for this character being the top of the character's trash loincloth, and that made it so that there was no animation errors. The next skin is the clay skin. This was made in Blender. I made the character in 3D and then I applied a clay shader to the character. The reason for this is because I have changed the design of the first level. This was originally going to be the cloudy cottage to the clay cottage, and I'm now making this level in 3D. I already originally designed to make this level in 3D, but I felt like clay was more suitable as a 3D material to base this level on, in opposed to clouds, so now this level is primarily clay based and the character is clay based to show this. This skin is mostly a joke skin. I don't expect anyone to actually enjoy this skin. I think it just looks funny to make a 3D model of Pep-Pel in the game. These are technically just still 2D sprites, but they are renders of the sprites used in game, so she looks gross in 3D. I love how this looks. It looks like early 2000s 3D animation. She has awful rim lighting on it. It looks so silly and so awful. I adore this skin so much. Finally, we have the outline skin. This is a test skin that I thought looked interesting, so I kept it. This skin is not corresponding to any specific level. The other 3 skins are corresponding to the first 3 levels of the games, so you have to beat those levels to unlock those skins. This skin specifically is unlocked by beating a number of levels, probably 3 or 4. You beat any 3 or 4 levels in my game, you unlock the outline skin. It's the character's outline. I coloured the texture white and then drew an outline over it and then drew details on the outline. It works surprisingly well. I'm honestly surprised at how interesting of a skin this looks. Maybe because the game is so colourful by default and Pep-Pel is so colourful by default and all the skins are so colourful, having one that is just black and white and an outline is interesting because the rest of the skins don't have this. One thing about the skin I am debating on is changing it to the sketch skin. This would be that the character would look more like a early development sketch and she would have more detailing lines of where positionings for the eyes would look, for example, but I'm not 100% sure on this. I like the outline skin, but I feel like a sketch skin could also look interesting. I could alternately include both skins, but I feel like there would be an overlap in the visual design between the outline skin and the sketch skin if both were included in-game. The overall design I wanted for the skins in general is for each of these to be completely unique. I'm not a very big fan of games that have optional skins for characters, or it's just a colour swap or a different costume. I wanted these to all be wholly unique and could potentially be their own character, in opposed to just a skin swap of Pep-Pel. The costume bubble itself was very fun to draw for. It is just a bubble shape I made, and then I drew vague impressions of different colours on it, and then I increased the saturation of the bubble to a very large amount, so it has this glossy, soapy covering to the bubble, and I think this really adds to the effect of the bubble. Unfortunately, I got 90% through designing this feature and adding the bubble and adding all the mechanics for this, and then I realised that Rayman Origins had the exact same bubble mechanic for its costumes, and that felt bad. But I enjoy this system so much that I'm probably not going to change it, despite the fact that another game has the identical system. Once the player interacts with the bubble, changing their costume, we will have a visual effect play from the bubble, we'll have an audio cue play from the bubble, and we also had the bubble do a squishy animation effect for it interacting with the player, just squishing back and forth. Classic animation squish and stretch. Now let's talk about how the skins are actually swapped and how the skins are saved on loading. I'll first talk about how the skins are swapped. It's a little bit complicated in the fact that a lot of features have to be swapped for, but it's not overly complicated in the actual design and code for this. What we do is we first swap the sprite texture material that Pep-Pel is using. And when I say sprite texture material, I mean just the material. Pep-Pel is a 3D model. Despite looking like a two-dimensional character, she has a bunch of three-dimensional planes that are animated in 3D. So I used the mesh renderer for Pep-Pel, and I changed her material from her regular material to another material based on the index of the bubble. So if the bubble had an index of 2, that would correspond to the desert level. And this is going to feed into the player visual scripting to tell the character to swap to skin number 2. What this has is a material reference the player needs to swap to, and it also has a color reference for the colors of this skin. Detail why that is important later. We then take this material and we apply it to the character's mesh renderer, so this is just swapping the character's base material for the other material. But the issue with this is that there are multiple objects that are not swapped. For example, Pep-Pel can throw potions. These are not tied to the material renderer and are tied to sprite renderers to make this more complicated. So these needs to also be swapped to correspond to the potions that the character has on their hip. All I do is then make 2 additional sprites for each potion along with the texture of the skin, and I change the item that the player throws when they throw a potion for each of these potions sprites for the skin. So for example, in the desert we have a orange and a pink gumball. We're going to change the Pep-Pel orange potion to be this orange sprite and the pink potion to be this pink sprite for this skin. Finally, we have the colours for this skin. This is the most complicated part because Pep-Pel uses a variety of line renderers and particle renderers to make it so that she can have particle and visual effects when she moves very quickly. For example, when moving very quickly, you have a line renderer that extends from the character to give the impression of them blurring and moving very fast. Luckily, I planned in advance for such a system, and I made these particle and line renderers use only 3 colours, this being the colour of Pep-Pel's hair, the colour of Pep-Pel's skin, and the colour of Pep-Pel's clothing. So what I have to do is have a reference to each of these particle renderers and each of these line renderers based on if they are going to be the colour of Pep-Pel's skin, hair, or clothing. And then all I do is I change the colour that these would be to the colour of the skin that Pep-Pel is equipping. So we just change reference color to saved index color of this skin. We swap red skin to Pep-Pel's darker brown skin when she has the desert, so the colors match when she has visual effects. The only thing that isn't changing is that in the tutorial systems there is a UI sprite for Pep-Pel that appears, and in the splash screens there is also a UI sprite for Pep-Pel that appears. These don't change to correspond to your skin, and there's a reason for that. I didn't want to redraw this image 27 times for every single skin in game. That would take too long, and I feel like personally it's not something I particularly care about having an inconsistency with, and you shouldn't care about it either. Finally, we have the system for saving the player's currently selected skin. The player is playing the game, they close the game, they would want their skin that they have changed into to persist once they load into the game. Or, more obviously, you pick a skin, you load into a level, you'd want to still have that skin when you load into a level. This is pretty simple. All I have to do is have a reference to the player's currently selected skin in their save file, and then all I do on level load, or whenever the player is loaded into a level, so the beginning of a level, the beginning of a hub area, we're going to access the player's visual scripting, and we're going to very quickly change what the player's visual skin is. All we do in this system is we forgo any visual effects and visual effects that play audio that are not visual, because we don't want these to play every single time the player loads into a level and they don't have the default skin. We want to mask this, so we just don't create those effects, and all we do is we change all the visuals that I have previously changed. Very simple, just a int number on the player's save file indicating their currently selected skin. Because of the way skins are unlocked, I don't have to keep track of the player's currently unlocked skins on their save file, or check if the player has unlocked the skin that they're currently selected in, because the player will have no way of interacting with a skin bubble without already unlocking that skin, unless they edit their save file. All I need to do is keep a reference of the player's skin the player has selected, because if the player hasn't unlocked that skin, they wouldn't have been able to select it in the first place, and therefore they wouldn't have been able to have the skin anyway. It's not something I need to check for to make sure the player has unlocked the skin when they already have it in their save file. And that's it for Devlog. I am really happy with how this turned out. I'm a big fan of the skin swap system. I was originally fearful that this would be a complicated system and they would have a lot of errors and a lot of things I would have to change. I would have to change the materials, I would have to change specific particle render systems, I would have to change a lot of effects, I would have to change a lot of thrown items like the potions, but it ended up being pretty easy to do. I just had to organize and categorize of what needed to be changed, and certain things could be overlapped when I changed them in coding. For example, the coding for particle systems and the coding for line renderers could have the same color setup, and that aided in making this system a lot easier to do. Also, alternate character skins are very fun to draw. All I have to do is redraw over the base Pep-Pel sprite sheet, and I could make my own sprites incredibly easy, to the point where I'm debating adding an in-game sprite editor, and then players can make their own sprites of Pep-Pel in-game. It would be incredibly complicated, but it would be funny. Let me know in the comments what you would like for Pep-Pel to wear in the future. If you suggest a funny enough costume, I'll probably add it.